I'm going to start with a bit of a view on market research in 2030. So this is saying, well, what will market research look like 10 years from now? What might change? How might our skills need to adapt, ready for the future? Let me ask you, what topics are buzzwords are hot at the moment in market research? What do you hear about? Big data. Any others? AI. Any others? Panels. Any others? You must work for panel. So my first interaction with the concept of AI, big data, and machine learning was in 1985. And it was from a book written by a guy called Douglas Adams called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A very funny book, but also a great predictor of our future. And in that book, there's a character who is destined to determine the answer to life, the universe, and everything else. Correct. Anybody in the room read that book? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? It is available in Vietnamese. I highly recommend it. In 1985, no, sorry, not 1985, 1978, I was 8 years old when that book came out. Douglas Adams basically predicted the concept of machine learning and artificial intelligence. The machine that they asked, the computer that they asked to answer the question to life, the universe, and everything else was called default. And if any of you follow Alphabet or Google, you'll realize they acquired a company recently called Deepthought, which is trying to do something very similar today. Now, other than Ralph, because I know he knows the answer, because he just mouthed it to me, can anybody tell me the answer that Douglas Adams revealed in his book through the answer of the meaning of life, the galaxy, and everyone else? Shout it out.
42.
42, you get a prize, sir. 42 was the answer. It's not actually the same book, but the problem with 42, and that's one of the points I'm going to talk about today, is that was the answer. And this is the problem sometimes with equations, algorithms, machine learning, and AI, is they spit out an answer, but they don't necessarily explain the answer. And these are some of the things we're going to be talking about. It's very, very hard to forecast the future, even 10 years from now, what market research might look like. It's really hard. And to show that to you, I'm going to take you back 10 years and show you what people were saying about market research back in 2009. What were the buzzwords? What was hot? What was going on in our industry? What were people talking about? Just so you can get an idea of, frankly, how much bullshit we espouse as market researchers about our future, and how much we fear when fear really isn't necessary. As human beings, we overpredict the potential impact of technology and change, and we tend to be a little bit pessimistic about how it might affect us, and we need not be. Can anybody guess how much the market research industry is worth this year? Some of you should know, because I sent you the numbers recently. Shout it out if you know. Just under 100 million. So in 2000, that was for 18, in 2019, it's going to be just over 100 million. Can anybody remember what it might have been worth in 2009? 60, one guess. Any other guesses? There's a prize going for the closest guess. 25, anyone else? 48, okay, it goes to 25. 30 million was the value of our industry just 10 years ago. So the industry's grown substantially. It's now at 2019 as a guess, just over 100 million. But as you can see from Saigon's skyline, lots can change in 10 years, but, and this is what I'd like to talk about, we tend to exaggerate the potential of change. So let's just look on the left-hand side. I'm going to talk about what was going on in 2009. Okay. We were coming out of the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, so a lot of companies were reeling in the region. We began being cognizant of GMO, of Toluna, and other panel companies. Really, they were just entering our radar here in Asia. We began being cognizant of offshoring, the idea of having knowledge process outsourced to other markets. And we just became cognizant of social listening and using Facebook and other social media, mostly blogs at that time, to understand what consumer conversations were going on. Just before 2009, WPP bought what is known as Kantar today. SurveyMonkey was in the news for securing venture capital. Now, Google surveys came out in 2012. I remember seeing Google surveys when they launched, thinking, oh my God, that's the end. Cimigo's never going to do any quantitative research again. And SurveyMonkey, the number of people who sent me terrible surveys in SurveyMonkey, and the number of people who said, oh Richard, what are you going to do, SurveyMonkey? SurveyMonkey. Do you know SurveyMonkey has never, ever made a profit? Even last year, they lost over 150 million US dollars. Rather a lot of bullshit. Online survey accounted for 23% of global MR spend. Here in Vietnam, just 4%. I remember this well because this was the year, and Huai Trang's in the room, I think she was part of this process. We started Cimigo's online panel, a little bit early, wasn't a lot of business, but we started an online panel. But it was only worth 4% of the industry in Vietnam. IBM bought SPSS. You remember SPSS? I don't know who still uses SPSS? Anyone still use SPSS? I wonder whether IBM are really happy with that decision. I bet you Adobe are happy with their decision though, because Adobe have become a major force in the creative industry and the analytics industry since the acquisition of something that most of us would probably missed in 2009. What's happening now? Let's move on to 2019. We're kind of retreating a little bit thanks to Brexit. Yes. Thanks to Donald Trump and others. Thanks to popularism and nationalism. We're kind of retreating from global trade a little bit. One of the most substantial things that's happened, if you work in analytics and you want to multiply your salary by 10, tell somebody you work in data science. Right? Don't say you work in analytics, say you're a data scientist. WPP now is divesting itself a little bit of Kantar, or majority of Kantar. Nielsen, Kantar, GfK, some of the biggest global companies are now in the hands of private equity, which normally suggests change, but for private equity to be involved, they normally like quite a big factor of a positive benefit when they exit. So perhaps positive change to come industry-wise. I talked about this earlier, SurveyMonkey, still losing money. Online surveying accounted for 28% of ad spend globally. So in 10 years, we increased the amount of spend online by 5%. So maybe we don't need to panic about machine learning, AI, neuroscience, and everything else that proponents of new MR like to yell at us. And it's interesting, today we've got 2 of the 3 sponsors are overseas panel companies, GMO, Rakuten, and there's probably 3 or 4 panel companies in the audience. SAP bought Qualtrics. Qualtrics is again a do-it-yourself sort of survey tool, very good in the customer experience field. SAP have bought that. That's an indicator of the changing structure of our industry globally and the companies that will be key players going forward. Bain, Boston, Accenture, they're basically competing today with advertising and creative. They're really changing the nature of their business, and they're increasingly, not here, but in developed markets, buying into data analytics, data science, market research, customer experience companies, as they extend their footprint in the marketing ecosystem. So, some quotes from back in the day in 2009, which might explain why our 2 sponsors are both from Japan. This is from the president at the time of Intage. Online surveys have helped transform Japan from one of the most expensive markets to research into one of the most cost-efficient. True. More and more people are living part of their lives online, and sites like Facebook provide a way for brands and researchers to have a 2-way conversation. From the market research lead at Facebook in 2009. Also true. This year, Pepsi, this is Stefan Gans, market forces dictate that the insights industry need to get better, faster, cheaper. Well, if you're on the supply side of the business, you might have heard that before. This is from John, who's the CEO of System 1. We have some of his team here today. Basically, if the insights industry wants to survive, it needs to be far more predictive and far more efficient and avoid wasting money. So these are the conversations that were happening then and that are happening now. ESOMAR and also a group called Green Book do some great things on looking at what's going on in trends. The most talked about new market research method in 2009, and I know some of you in the room went on training for this, was NLP, Neuro-Linguistics Programming, anthropology, semiotics, buzz networks, ethnography. I can tell you that none of those account for more than 3.5% of global spend. But these were the biggest, hottest topics that people were speaking about, our industry was speaking about in 2009. They're not irrelevant, they just weren't the threats or the sizable opportunities that people predicted. Trend scouts, blog mining, remember those? Yahoo 360? These two were the last. These were the least getting the least attention, and they are the ones that actually have now significant amounts of spend behind them. So as an industry, in market research, we weren't very good at predicting our own future, right? Number 8 and 9 are the ones that probably have the most spend and have the most impact on our industry, whilst 1 to 7 really had very little impact. Today, what are people talking about? You've mentioned it as an audience: AI, automation, data integration, I can never pronounce that, interoperability, which basically, I had to look it up, basically means that one piece of data can speak to another piece of data. Machine learning, great. Big data, woohoo! Data science, yay, 10 times the salary. Real-time results, behavioral economics. So these are the top 9 things that our industry, globally, not in Vietnam, is talking about being forces of change for our future. And I would like to call bullshit on the majority of them. And I'm going to tell you why. And you're, of course, entitled to your own opinions. Do I need to click, Hank Tang, or you will click? You or me? This is telling you from Stack Overflow what are the most popular softwares and how that's changed over time. If you think about software, it's quite indicative of how we collect data, how brands are speaking to their audience. So if you how companies are interacting with their own internal transactional data with C++, with Objective-C, SQL databases, Ruby very much for app development, JavaScript, Java very much for app, mobile interface, web interface development, PHP very much web-based, and you can see over time where the demand for different languages sits and how that is changing. Because over time, what's happened is the digitalization of everything. How many briefs have you had from banks this year saying we're going to digitalize our bank? A lot, right? Wonderful, what a wonderful idea. But you can see how companies are starting to change and address the masses and masses of data that they get. Who can tell me what the top one's going to be? Python, correct. Python is about to be the most popular. I got to tell you a story. I was so pissed off with people asking me about, Richard, how's your business going to go with AI, machine learning? And I would tell them what I'm about to tell you. But I thought, well, maybe I'd better check. So there's a lovely school in District 4 called the Coder School. So I went and did a Python course, just to educate myself, to make sure I wasn't delusional or having some massive case of confirmation bias. And I can assure you that I wasn't delusional, and what I'm about to tell you remains true. I got a prize for this one. I'm gonna label these as hype, basically involving a new buzzword for something that already exists. versus something that I think will create some form of transformational change for our industry. There are only 3 of the 9 that I think are going to create a transformational change. And it's one person's view, okay? You don't have to agree with me, that's fine. Can anyone guess the 3 that I think are going to be transformational change? Data integration? Automation? Behavior economics. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, artificial intelligence is basically what research has been doing for a long time, which is using formula, algorithms, if you like, to predict outcomes. It's not new. Equations? Sure. Automation? Really? We haven't had automation in a lot of what we do for the last 10 years? I think we have. Data integration, we can't take different pieces of data and integrate them well. I think for those of you from the large companies who have retail media panel, you're already doing that probably quite successfully. Clients are certainly doing that. I believe data interoperability will be a key issue because there's a lot of legacy systems, and as new systems come on board, as people digitalize process, that's certainly something that's creating a lot of change. Machine learning, I agree. Because, not that it's new, we've been doing this all the time as a research industry, but typically on data sets of 1,000, 2,000, 500, 150. The power now is we can move beyond SPSS, we can use new tools like Python to extract data, R to manipulate data, and machine learn from it. We can use those tools and we can crunch so many more solutions. But it's not new, but it is having a significant impact on how our clients will be using data going forward. Big data, okay, but it's transactional data that languages like SQL query, Python have made much more easy for clients to access internally and use internally. Data science, so grow your salary if you're an analyst. Real time, not new. Behavioral economics, I believe, will have a significant impact. Better framing, shorter questions, better experiments, more rapid deployment of iterative tests of products and concepts and so on. Again, one man's view. So I'm being a little contrarian in terms of what the industry thinks. Really, I think it's about the size of databases that we now have to operate and our clients have to operate with, and the tools that we have that make using those databases so much more powerful. So, my title is to predict your research world in 2030. These are the 6 areas that I think are going to have the biggest impact on our industry. I gotta say, it'll be in the UK, the US, and Germany long before it hits here, so don't panic. It's going to take a while for it to impact Vietnam, but I think we will see much more client-side analytics with data science teams, much better data integration, less silos. Walk into a bank and an insurance company, have them talk to you about the silo problems they have. Much more use of machine learning, so better predictions coming out. And much more use of voice, image, and text analytics, which is research, but it's observational research rather than asking survey questions. We need to link survey data to clients' internal tools and internal analysis. And that requires the need to tag segments and triggers on customer databases. That will require repositories that will sit inside the clients, not with us, unfortunately, the agencies, and it will require a lot more visualization of results, much more data visualization and better data visualization than we're seeing today. Consumer data trading services, I think, much like the advertising world has trading desks, I think the future for research and other providers of data, whether you're providing a credit scoring, you're a mobile company, you're a CRM company, we are all going to have to interact with trading desks, i.e. some sort of platform, and privacy regulation is going to drive that substantially. I'm personally invested in one, so the next slide is completely biased to me. A company called Vericliff, which is looking to provide exactly that and give customers the right and money, a little bit, for access to their data, but the ability to meet the regulations of Europe, which are the strongest in the world at the moment, and give consumers their data privacy.
So if you're a panel company, a research company, credit scoring company, you're going to have to be in the world of the future that I would predict. You're going to have to be able to tag this and identify where data has come from and desensitize the personal details in it. The next three, observational data will become, or maybe already is, much bigger than asking data. So we will observe a lot more in research than we will by asking surveys, because the data is going to be available, whether it's the wristband you're wearing that tracks your health, whether it's your Internet of Things and how you interact with your home devices, your mobile phone and all the data that collects, social networks, Facebook, communities, whether they're communities you belong to or whether they're organized communities from clients for research purposes, CTV. So lots happening with CTV at the moment, particularly operational level for stores and retail. Drones, we're writing a proposal at the moment, which probably some of you are, which is about using drones to look at agricultural land. Satellite imagery is being used a lot by crop companies and others to forecast what is going to happen with the crop this year, what a price is going to be, how do I trade. In native app data, it's going to surpass, and maybe it already is, I don't know, but it's going to surpass survey asking. And therein lies the need for data integration, the need for big data science, and for data visualization. Mobile with geolocation. So unless privacy stops it, which there is a risk of, either geolocation or context triggered. So context, I mean, I'm about to sit down for a meal, or I've turned on this health tracking app, some sort of context, because I think a lot of our consumer responses and need states and motivations and barriers are often driven by their context. We can all feel very differently about things as we move through the day in different contexts. And I think that will have a lot of built-in behavioral economic fundamentals to iterate experiments and consumer learning. And if you're in qual, well, you chose the best place to be forever and ever and ever, because all the previous five, they're great at quantifying stuff. They are absolutely awful at explaining why, which is why qual will remain strong and have a wonderful future. That said, they're the 6 things that I would predict as changing. Our competitive arena is going to change dramatically. If I speak to friends in the communication field in Singapore who run agencies, they will be presenting against and competing with a technology company, a platform company, Adobe, one day, and the next day they'll be in a pitch where they're all collaborating. And this is increasingly going to happen in research. If I look at what is GoViet in Vietnam, Gojek in Indonesia, they have a team of 30 researchers because they fundamentally not only run transport, food delivery, also payment. They are a huge competitor to our business in Indonesia. Grab will be similar here. Tencent, WeChat, Zalo, they're going to be a competitor. Google already are, Amazon and other e-commerce sites, Adobe, McKinsey, SAP, data visualization tools, etc. Our future in 10 years is not going to be Nielsen versus Kantar versus Ipsos versus InTouch. It's going to change quite dramatically. That's a note to remind myself. All in one. So I don't think anyone, but I may well be wrong. If I look at Tencent, they have a wonderful ecosystem in China around WeChat, which is all in one everything. I think it's going to be very hard for one agency to provide an all-in-one. So if I'm Kantar today, I can. If I'm Nielsen today, I can, right? In the future, I think that's going to be a lot more difficult, and I think the all-in-one is going to be that data integration, data visualization, data science team that sits client-side. So, actually the title of my presentation is What Skills Do You Need for Your Future in Market Research? So, if you haven't got grey hair and you're not 50 like me, and you're entering research in your early stages of your career, this is what I would suggest. You need the grounding in market research, of course. I meet a lot of client-side researchers who seem to be lacking those fundamentals. and I shall move on. You need to not be a data analyst, but a data scientist. Right, so what does that mean? That means you need the ability to use something like Python, something like R, so you can access lots of different data sets, transactional data sets, as well as survey data sets. Trust me, I did that Python course, it was 4 weeks. I was the oldest man in the room, I was the only white guy in the room. I am awful at programming, but it's really, really, really easy. Because if I want a complicated segmentation piece of code, or I want a complicated predictive piece of code, I just go and get a template and I copy the template and change the variables. So don't panic, it's not that hard. You need marketing skills, of course, to be a good market researcher. You need to be able to speak to your interaction. There's a guy called Ray Paul runs UMR, I forget his family name now, always describes the future of a researcher should be T-shaped. They should have broad skills and a lot of depth in one subject so they can be a specialist. If you remember Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, he talked about this idea of outliers, and what he meant by that was people who are really, 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 really good at one thing. Could be a pianist, could be a mountain climber, could be a data analyst. But 10,000 hours is a lot of time to spend on one thing, right? But that's what he suggested in his book, that outliers are really, really, really good because they put in the work and they spend the time, they get into that idea of flow when they're doing what they love and what they specialize in. More recently, we've had a book by Epstein talking about range, which is no. There's very few of us will ever be an outlier that was so good at something. You need to be a generalist, Epstein says. You need to bring experience and perspectives to the table. You need to be able to brainstorm from a wide area of background and knowledge. They're both kind of right. So there's no one right answer. I do like what Ray says in UMR, but I think the depth of specialism doesn't need to be so strong. I would err on the side of being a generalist than spending too much time specializing in one subject. If I'd spent my life specializing in discrete choice modeling, well, no one would have a drink with me. And frankly, the computer systems that exist today would have taken away my skill set. So I would say that we're far better off having a wider base of experience than deeply specializing. Most of the time we can find specialists if we really need them, and they're normally available on a project basis. Manage upwards, that's never changed. My former boss is in the room and my former boss's boss is in the room. And I think the best people who get to the top of their companies are very good at managing upwards. That's not a new. Social skills. If you take a market researcher, you take away the social skills, you have a data analyst. You need social skills, okay? You need to be able to facilitate, you need to be able to hold conversations with consumers and with clients alike. Probably one of the biggest areas is the ability to tell and visualize a story. At the end of my course at the Coder School, which I highly recommend as a simple course in Python, the old guy, the idiot in the class who was always asking for help from the teacher, me, they had a competition and I won, and I was the worst programmer. And the teacher knew I was the worst programmer. I won because for the last 25 years of my career I've been telling stories to clients. I've been bullshitting. The ability to tell and visualize a story is more important than that. Most of you, because you've got experience, would know that. You need a service orientation because you need to know when to say no. Or, even better, yes, Mr. Client, but let me send you an invoice for that. And I think a lot of us forget you need to live and you need to love. And it sounds a bit soppy, but it's so, so true. Because if you don't live life, and you don't have a sense of humor about your life, and you don't love in life, then you have no experiences to draw upon. And those experiences shape your perspectives of the business issues that you're tackling, and they're absolutely critical. And you need proactive confidence. You need confidence when you stand up. You need to be able to voice an opinion and you need to be proactive about it. And I'll give you an example which is very detrimental to my own business. If I meet somebody who's been at Nielsen for 5 years, and they come into the room, they project confidence. They present well, they project a confidence which makes me think, my God, these people are good. Whilst if I look at my own company, I think they don't have the same level of confidence. They might have the same level of skills, but the Nielsen person will win through because they project a level of confidence which is clearly, I've never worked at Nielsen, but those of you that have can explain it, is something that's built into their DNA at a very early stage. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for me. I will take 1 or 2 brief questions before we move on to the speaker if anyone has one. Any questions? Going once, going twice, yes sir? Please go ahead. You might have to shout.
All right, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. There's a microphone now.
Oh, I mean, at the middle of this presentation, you were showing like what are going to happen, the transformations, like what would be more observation-based rather than response-based. I fully agree with you on that part. But then slightly before that, when you say behavioral economics is going to be one of the 3 transformational cues to the disruption to this industry. Now, there seems to be an apparent contradiction here. We are saying in future we are not going to rely on responses, so kind of that reduces the scope of asking questions, so the need of behavioral economics. But then you were saying that would be one of the disruptive elements. Could you help us understand?
Sure. Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game, right? They're not mutually exclusive. So what I'm saying is there'll be far more observational data, and a lot of insights we'll be able to glean from that data because of the new tools to access that data are available. When it comes to asking, I think behavioral economic principles will play a much stronger role, because I think for a very, very, very long time, and I'll blame my home country in the late 50s, early 60s, research has been designed behind a very logical, rational thinking, decision-making process, which I think more recent studies by the likes of Daniel Kleinman and others have pretty much demonstrated that are not necessarily reflecting of how consumers make choices. And therefore, there's a lot of principles we can employ in market research that come from that sphere of behavioral economics that will make our asking far more informative and actually will help make shorter surveys. Rather than asking somebody 15 attributes about 8 different brands, there are better ways to ask these questions, and behavioral economics is quite a force behind pushing some of those new in inverted commas, because I think Daniel Kleinman wrote his book some time ago, and others. But so they're not mutually exclusive issues. I'm saying there'll be a lot more observational data, and when we ask, behavioral economics will be a big part of it.